Hey, it's BAO, and this is Coffee with BAO. This is a series where I chat with cool people who are doing cool stuff in business, music, entertainment, pop culture, and more. And I like to specifically focus on the topics of their creative process, their cultural identity, and personal growth. And since it's one of our early episodes, I'd really love your feedback on what's working and what could use some work. So please leave me a comment or contact me at coffeewithbao.com. Let's meet our guest. Today I'm hanging out with a fellow Asian American creative and troublemaker. He's an author, musician, podcaster, activist, and entrepreneur. He's published 3 books, including a new memoir. He's been a speaker at hundreds of events like TEDx and South by Southwest, and he is the winner of a unanimous United States Supreme Court decision on the trademarking of his band name, The Slants. He's an advisor or a board member of dozens of nonprofit organizations, including the Slants Foundation, where I serve on the board. And he is my friend and a man who looks very good in a business suit, Simon Tam. Simon! I either need like a applaud sound or like a laugh track to put on when I introduce my guests.
You should get both. You know, they do that on Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, like the NPR podcast. It works very, very well.
Simon, thank you so much for joining me this morning. I've got my coffee. What are you drinking over there?
This is Oolong Tea over here. It's very tasty. I feel like the older I get, the more Chinese I get, because I had like some wintermelon soup this morning, and now I'm drinking Oolong Tea.
That's so cool. Can you tell us where you're dialing in from?
Cincinnati, Ohio.
Cincinnati!
So, beautiful Midwest, aka Rust Belt, but that's a terrible name. But Cincinnati is fantastic. I love it. I am new here. Only been living here a couple months.
That's awesome. So like we met when you were doing the Slants. I mean, you're still doing the Slants, but we met when I think you guys were touring.
Yeah, a ton of fun. And there was another band on the bill who was also comprised of Asian Americans. That was Lemon Dropkick.
That's right. That was really fun, actually. I really like playing with you guys just because you have such a focused purpose and are totally professionals, and you let loose on stage, which feels really good.
We try to make it fun, but you know, I've been a big fan of your work as well, because I love I remember just the visual arts and the story that you brought into your presence. It's awesome. I love it.
That's so great. So you lived in Portland at that time. You're in Ohio now. You were born and raised in San Diego. Can you give us a little bit of a background on your Asian American story and I guess how you guys ended up in San Diego, how you became a restaurant kid?
Sure. So my dad is of Chinese descent. He actually kind of grew up in what's called the Hoi Ping area. And what's interesting about him coming to America was that he was not the first of like his family to come, but his grandfather. So my great-grandfather was. And my great-grandpa like came to the U.S. as part of a U.S.-China diplomacy project, but it was kind of during that time period, like the early 1900s, that the U.S. started passing a lot of anti-Chinese laws.
That's right.
Laws that basically treated us like vermin. And because of those laws, he kind of got stuck here for almost 40 years, leaving his wife and leaving his kids in China. By the time he got back to China, he actually got to meet his grandkids, my father included.
Whoa, that's so gnarly.
So, I mean, just imagine being separated for that long of a time period. And when he came back, it was what the intention was to bring his wife back. So my great grandma, and they were going to bring my father along and leave the rest of the family in China. Well, after like an arduous 2-day journey from China to Hong Kong, mostly by foot and partially by boat, and a lot of bribery, forged documents and other things to get them out of China. By the time they got to Hong Kong, the U.S. passed yet another law, and that was basically this idea that grandchildren would not count as members of the family. So my dad had to go with my great-grandparents to the United States. But because they kind of had to bribe their way out of China, he couldn't go back to China either. So at 11 years old, he was left to fend for himself in Hong Kong, survived by taking multiple jobs and putting himself through school. And after about 6.5 years, my great grandfather happened to move next door to somebody who would eventually become a US congressman. And together they helped give my dad political asylum. So he was able to get to San Diego. Yeah. On my mom's side, she was a teenager. She was 17, turning 18, and she met a U.S. Marine. They fell in love. They got married, moved to San Diego. But after a few years, they got divorced. And eventually, she met my dad, who was also in San Diego at the time. And so that's how I came to be. And my dad, like his jobs, like his side hustles, surviving on the streets of Hong Kong, were helping out in wonton restaurants and working on Chinese food. So inevitably, he just started working at restaurants and then opened his own restaurant. And that's kind of how I ended up growing up in restaurants.
That's such a great story. You must be really proud of like how resilient your ancestors were, just to do all this.
It's incredible. But, when you hear the stories of how families came to the US and kind of ended up going into other parts of the world, you realize that it's a very common trait. It takes a lot to uproot your whole family and move somewhere else for opportunity, especially for that future generation. And I hear the same stories of bravery, and even in families who are trying to travel across the world today. I couldn't even imagine it. To be honest with you, like the amount of difficulty and just the lack of dignity that some people have to endure in that process. My family alone, coming across into the US, the immigration officials couldn't pronounce our Chinese name properly, Tang. So they ended up translating it in many different ways. So even though I am Tam, T-A-M, my cousins who came from the same family are T-A-N, Tan. And I have other family members that are Tong, T-O-N-G, because they just couldn't figure it out, that inconsistency. And I can't imagine for a culture that's thousands and thousands of years old, just because of mistranslation, you lose a bit of your family identity and connection because of that. But those are the things you're willing to sacrifice because you want that opportunity for your kids. I'm just amazed, and yeah, it's a bit humbling to think that's the generation before me. That's what I gotta live up to. But
wow,
it's cool.
That's super cool. Growing up as an Asian American, people usually put their kids through formal music training. Did you do any of that? How did you get into music?
I credit my aunt and my cousins because they started before us. They started taking piano lessons at age 4 and 5. And when they did that, they were convincing my parents to let me and my sister take music lessons too. Of course, I grew up watching MTV and I was like, whoa, those dudes are shredding on the guitar. I want to learn guitar. When we went to the music store, I'm like, that's what I want. And they handed me something that was a little smaller and had fewer strings. And I thought it was a guitar, but it turns out it was a ukulele. I didn't know this until later on. And I was like, wait, why does this not sound the same? And so we took a couple lessons. It didn't really last that long, but I held on to that thing. And then at age 10, I begged and begged my parents. I was like, hey, if I get all A's, if I behave, can I take real lessons? And we went to, I still remember Garrett Band Instruments. It was right down the street from my parents' restaurant. So it was very convenient for them and it kept me busy. And I got my bass guitar and I chose the bass. It had the same amount of strings, but I also chose it because, also because of MTV. I saw Duff McKagan killing it. And I was like, I want that. I want to do that. That's awesome. And so, yeah, I took lessons for 3 years from this old jazz musician named Nate, and he was amazing. And it was funny because I kept wanting to play rock and roll. I'd be like, I want to play Sweet Child of Mine in Paradise City and all this. And he's like, no, you got to learn the blues. You got to learn them. He gave me this book. It was 300 pages long. It was just blues scales. And I was like, oh, this seems boring. But because it was very meticulous about me memorizing those things and understanding music theory, I really appreciate that now because I see those elements in rock and roll and all these other music like genres that I enjoy. And I don't think if I learned all that myself, I don't think I would appreciate things in the same way. And I probably wouldn't even have like the playing style that I have because of that.
Yeah, totally. So most teenagers don't go and start a record label, but you somehow went and did that. I'm just curious about like what drove you to kind of do more than most people at that age.
I think part of it is because I saw what happened to my parents, and how not only my parents, but my aunts and uncles, they had to take initiative to survive by starting restaurants because people wouldn't give them jobs, or starting handyman services, or doing all the other things that they had to do. They didn't wait for opportunities. They made opportunities. And when I started playing bass, I realized like, that's what I want. Like, I don't want to sit there and wait for someone. Like, yeah, I would dream about being on a record label, but then I thought, well, why don't I just make it my own? I'll figure it out. And I started by taking my dad's hi-fi stereo and making copies of cassettes and releasing releases on cassettes. And then when I got into high school, this new technology came out where you can buy your own CD burner. I bought one of the first CD burners available, and I just started making things for my friends' bands. And then because everyone was just like, I don't know how to get a record out. And I was like, well, why don't you just make copies? Why don't you just sell them at shows? And when I realized that like other people, not only did they just not know how, they were afraid of like taking the risk or taking the steps to get there. I was like, I'm just going to do it for you. So I would go through and figure out and negotiate my own rates for printing companies, like printing my own booklets, stickers, t-shirts, and that kind of thing. And I created a catalog of band services and just dropped them off at record stores all around town. Like, hey, if you want to get t-shirts made or stickers or CDs replicated, you contact me. And so I started doing that for bands around town. Then it was just kind of natural. I just figured like, okay, those people have shows. How do I get a show? And I figured out how to rent out venues and just put on my own show. And I was like,
dang,
okay,
dude.
like I just kind of worked backwards. Like, okay, that's what I want. And if I can't get it through someone else, how could I do that for myself? So that's kind of how it all started. But I think it was just watching how my parents operated. Like they didn't wait, like when they were setting up the restaurant, and when people weren't like selling authentic Chinese ingredients, they just set up relationships with their own like international grocery stores, and they figured out how to get their own products in. I was like, why can't I just do the same thing, but for the music side of things, or just make it happen? And what's the worst that could happen? Like I just end up with like a bunch of cassettes and CDs. There's nothing wrong with that either.
That's such a crazy story. Like, who does that in their teens? Like, it's nuts.
I kept me busy. It's funny because like I think part of the process is like I set up one of the first Battle of the Bands concerts at my school. And that's how I learned how to do things like get sponsorships. Like I just rode around on my bike, and whatever was within biking distance, I went door to door and I was like, hey, I'm from this high school. I'm putting on this giant concert. It's going to be the biggest concert our area's ever seen. You want to be a part of this. And whenever someone said, yeah, okay, we'll donate like a free bike helmet or whatever, I would put them, I was like, I'm going to have a special page of all the businesses that support this high school and what we're trying to do. And I just kind of went door to door, and I was like, oh, that was a lot easier than I thought. And so when I started a band or when I started whatever project, I just kept doing the same thing and realized like if you show them like why they benefit from participating in whatever you're doing, like if you show that you're genuinely wanting to have a partnership, like people are more often than not willing to work with you, especially if it's like a fairly low risk. So I just kind of took that model and applied it over and over again throughout my life.
Wow, that's super cool. So the Slants were a pretty big part of your life, I think, not only because they were, a band that you started, a purely Asian American focused band, but also because the band name The Slants got you into a multi-year court battle that ended up with a unanimous U.S. Supreme Court decision saying that you are in fact allowed to trademark the slants as a way to reclaim a racial slur. So there are literally like thousands of articles about that, so I don't want to like spend too much time on this. I just want to know two things about you as a human going through all of that. And the first one is like, what was the force that made you want to continue to hang on for what, eight or 10 years of legal stuff?
Well, I kind of joke around that I could be very stubborn, but I think there were a couple of factors at play. I mean, like I saw how the law was being used against marginalized communities. I mean, they're stripping people of their dignity. Usually the law was only used against communities of color and members of the LGBTQ community. And I just thought like, that shouldn't be acceptable. It's ridiculous. Like, why are we letting some government entity to decide stuff for our community? That's just not right. And so it was very much about that principle. But I know I couldn't have done this without the help of mentors and people who were just so generous and gracious, people who cared about justice and cared about art. And had I not had those people around me speaking wisdom into me and encouragement, I probably would have dropped it a long time ago.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That actually relates to my second question, which is like, how were you sustaining your life as a person during these 8 years with in terms of time and money?
Definitely, I had to rely on community. I mean, the folks around me were so important to me. And the other part of it was art. You know, a lot of those articles that you kind of reference, they talk about our legal journey and all the obstacles we went through in court. But I think they forget that the point of it all was for us to express ourselves through our music. And when I had a chance to do that, when we were on tour, when we were playing shows or working with kids, like doing anti-bullying events or cultural events, that's what kept me alive. That's what reminded me, like, this is why I do what I do. Because I saw the impact our music was making on audiences and the impact it was making on me, just being able to play and share and express through art. I don't know I don't think it would have been the same if I was just trying to register a trademark for a business or something like that.
Yeah.
Like the art was in of itself like a sustaining force.
Wow, that's super cool. So last year you published a new memoir called Slanted, How an Asian American Troublemaker Took on the Supreme Court. Can you give us a quick elevator pitch as far as what you were trying to accomplish?
I think I was trying to give a real look at what it's like to go to the Supreme Court as a person of color and as a musician. These are stories, like you hear about these big court cases going up before the Supreme Court all the time, but most people only know them by their names, like Roe v. Wade or something like that. They don't really know what it was like for the person and what the system kind of demands of you and what it takes from you as a result. So I wanted to provide a real honest look at what it's like, and also to share a bit of stories kind of throughout my life, different moments of how my Asian American identity like shaped who I was and why those stories mattered when it came to the Supreme Court. Because a lot of these cases that go up there are really about things like about dignity, about being recognized by the law. And I think we forget that because we're too busy looking at constitutional battles or whatnot.
Yeah.
But that story part, I think, is important because it teaches us like why we fight for the things we fight for and why those are important.
That's so awesome. So Simon Tam's book is called Slanted, How an Asian American Troublemaker Took on the Supreme Court. And I just want to read you a quote to help illustrate one of the major topics in the book. Dance rock band frontman Simon Tam sought to trademark the slants. His aim was to reappropriate a term long used to disparage a minority group and to render the term a badge of pride. All of us agreed. Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And you can find Simon's book at slantedbook.com. That's quite a quote to summarize your like decade-long court battle. And with Justice Bader Ginsburg's passing, it just feels like such a powerful statement.
Yeah, I mean, I watched a couple of her speeches. after we received our decision, and it was amazing, like how often she talked about our case. Like I couldn't believe it, because usually justices will talk about cases made like in the distant past, but she just kept using it as an example of like fighting for your principles, and how some principles, certain values, are things that transcend the traditional divide in politics. And so, what a humbling experience to have.
Yeah, it must be.
This rock star justice do that.
Yeah, that's really amazing. The book's been out for a little over a year, and you've been kind of hitting the circuit to talk about that experience and the book. What's been some of the highlights about promoting the book?
Some of the highlights of promoting the book have definitely been connecting with folks who saw themselves in the story in some way.
Yeah.
This year, obviously, haven't been able to do many book events at all. But last year, I was on the road over 200 days, going to bookstores, colleges, legal events around the country, sharing stories from it. And there have just been some really incredible moments, like meeting Asian American kids who grew up with our story from the time they're in elementary school till they're in high school. Like that's how long our court case lasted. They grew up hearing stories of the band and hearing stories about me, and just being able to meet them in person was just really extraordinary. Also in Washington, D.C. last year, I actually met some of the clerks who clerked under Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who came to our book event, and they were sharing, like, as we are going through our court case, how they're championing our cause and how much it meant for them, and how, Justice Ginsburg herself this is one of those things that she was really proud of the system actually working. And it was just cool to hear their perspective of what it was like behind the scenes, because I had no idea what was going on as we were arguing, and I didn't know until after the opinion was given that she supported our cause. But it was really cool to hear that she knew about the band, she knew about the work we were doing, and she was like blown away by it. So I mean,
it's remarkable, like totally insane.
Yeah, like who would have thought? Like I was just like the guy who dropped out of school to play in a punk band would end up being a part of this case and having a fan at the Supreme Court.
Yeah. I have a question about that, actually, like about people's perceptions of you. You've been speaking like on legal topics, and you're very confident about those topics because you spent a decade. However, you're not like a lawyer or anything. Like, do you ever feel that people perceive you in a certain way? Like, do you ever feel imposter syndrome when you're up there?
Oh, well, I feel like an imposter all the freaking time. I mean, how could I not? I think that's just a part of being a human being. Like, yeah, I didn't go to law school or anything, but I will say I felt confident because I read every law review article possible on the law. Like, I probably knew more about the law I was fighting against than most law professors or lawyers in this country, which is why I got invited to teach judges and lawyers about this law. But there's still a sense I'm like, I don't think I belong here. Like, why am I being invited, like asked to teach like some federal district judge like on this topic? But it also reminded me that our voices matter, our stories and our experiences matter, that there's something to it, that even if you don't know everything about everything, you still have a stake in it. And if you present it in a way that's deeply personal, and how it, like, for me, I just shared, like, this is what the client perspective is like. This is what it was like for me to fight through this law. That in of itself had value, that people needed to hear those stories. And so I just kind of reminded myself, like, this is what I'm doing. It's important because I can hopefully show how our laws can inadvertently discriminate against people. And if I could share that lesson, and if people could bend the moral arc of the universe towards justice just a bit more, it's worth enduring the insecurities that I might feel from feeling like I don't belong there. Plus, like, RBG threw me like a shout out, so like I could just like hold on to that, be like, yo, Notorious RBG said like what we're doing is important, so I'm gonna believe her. She's way smarter than me.
That's awesome. Most people don't write a memoir until they're a little older. You and I are very similar in age. I think just 1 or 2 years apart, and with all the stuff happening recently, in a morbid way, I've been thinking more about legacy, not just like for myself, but like people that I know who are like older and stuff. Do you ever think about your legacy, like as you were writing this book?
I thought about it a lot because, like, when I was writing it, people were like, "You're writing a memoir? Like, isn't that something you do at the end of your life?" And I'm like, "Well, I don't know. Like, you could kind of share moments from your life throughout it if you want." Several people did. Like Margaret Cho had this incredible one-woman show and memoir about her experience. So I thought, okay, like this is who I am in this moment. It might not be who I am forever, but I want to share these stories while they're fresh, while they're relevant, while people are talking about these issues. So that's kind of why I was doing it. But in terms of like thinking about the legacy, it's changed over the years. Originally, say 10 years ago, the legacy was me starting this band, and all the stories written about us in 2010, 2009 only had to do with the work that our band was doing. Like NPR, All Things Considered, talked about this band that was flipping stereotypes, and they're talking about the importance of reappropriation, how that practice went on for hundreds of years, and how now Asian Americans were engaging in that process. But a year later, no one was talking about that. Everyone was talking about the trademark case. Yeah. And then, fast forward a few years later, people were talking. There were certain people who talked about me as if I was going to be the one who's opening the floodgates for hate speech, and that how I was letting people like Dan Snyder win. I definitely didn't want to be connected with that. And it was like, the person who writes your own story should be you. Like you need to voice that. What matters is what I do with the moments I have now. If I could do something that can help impact other people and future generations, that's the most important thing. That ultimately is what's going to shape a legacy, I believe. But I don't do it for the legacy's sake. I do it for like now, like how can I impact more people?
So the slants, obviously led you on this journey of racial justice, and recently you've kind of channeled a lot of that activism work into your own nonprofit organization, the Slants Foundation. I think that takes that work to kind of a whole new level as far as organizationally and grabbing other people to help you execute and stuff. Can you give us a quick summary of the Slants Foundation and what your goal is for that?
Yeah, I think, when we first started, I kind of described it as an organization that would provide scholarships and mentoring to artists of color who are engaged in activism. I didn't realize, like, just by doing that, what it meant. Like, it meant also like putting a different perspective of approaching the arts. And it only kind of became more apparent to me this year as we were seeking grants to regift to other artists, and as people were talking about the work that we're doing, because the traditional arts grant system, it's not very diverse. It's not very inclusive. Like they all talk about it. It's all in their mission statements, right? But very few people know how to practice it. And so the people that need the funding the most don't get it. And on top of that, when they do get it, they spend more of their time reporting on like meeting grant deliverables than they are creating art. And I was that shouldn't be what arts funding is about. So I thought, what if we could change it? What if we could make it equitable and make it more about the process and more about the artist than the foundation itself? And so it's allowed us to be very, very quick to adjust to needs. Like when COVID hit, like launching a new grant within a few weeks because we saw like anti-Asian discrimination on the rise. Like it's given us the ability to pivot and meet needs in the moment. And I love that. I love like that we don't have to attach ourselves to old systems and processes as a result.
Do you have a new update on our last Slants Foundation event to help register voters as far as what numbers we got?
I think we're still at just a little bit over 500 people registered to vote for the first time and or get counted for the census. So that was like an event that we put together pretty close to the last minute, but it was really cool. And we got to partner up with Asian Services Ohio and some other organizations to make it happen. I think now that we know we could pull it off, with more lead time, we could definitely do a lot more with it. And so, that's another example of us pivoting. Like, hey, let's do an event real quick because we have the census, we have the election coming up. It is so important.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm a pretty introverted person. And so being able to participate in activism in the group environment has been really helpful. I just want to let people know that you can find the Slants Foundation at theslants.org. And we always need volunteers. We need financial contributions to help us run these programs. Anything else about the
foundation? We're promoting a ton of amazing talent, like amazing artists. So like if you just want to consume some great art, whether it's film, dance, or music, like we're very, very lucky to be working with some incredible talent.
Yeah, totally. I think you have one of the most insane, impressive work ethics of anybody I know, Simon. And something that a lot of adults who grew up as restaurant kids say is that being in that environment really helped cultivate their work ethic. Do you think that's true in your case?
Yeah, I mean, I saw how hard my parents were working. I mean, it was, I think, instilled in us because like my sister's kind of the same way. She could be a bit of a workaholic, but I think there's that, and I think there's also getting involved with nonprofits at a really young age was pretty instrumental in terms of like shaping my own work ethic. Because like I started working for nonprofits at age 15, and it was always this all hands on deck kind of attitude. And that's, in fact, I would say that's how I learned a lot of the skills I learned that I guess in a parallel track to starting my own label or to booking bands or becoming a promoter. It was just like, if you didn't know how to do something, you figured it out because you didn't have the money to hire someone else to do it. So it's like, I didn't have money to design a website. So then I figured out like HTML coding at the time. I mean, that was like with Angelfire and GeoCities. Like you just figured it out. Same thing with, restaurants or nonprofits. You just develop the right attitude to approach things. Like a lot of people define entrepreneurship as like someone who starts businesses, someone who does those things. I always define entrepreneurship as someone who can solve problems. If you see a problem in society and you can solve it and you can monetize it, then you're an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs are people who kind of help other people realize their full potential.
Yeah, that's amazing. Through your kind of everyday work, you're kind of always pushing. As every time I check in with you, you're working on something. Has there been anything that kind of knocks you off the horse sometimes? And how do you get back on in terms of being consistent and productive and feeling good about what you're doing?
There's no doubt that life comes up. That like life is full of challenges and obstacles. Just like a month and a half ago, actually, I don't know if anyone really know this. I didn't really share it with a ton of people, but like when we were doing our national voter registration event, like that night, 3 hours before the event, I learned my mom had cancer, like at a really advanced stage, that her stomach was full of tumors. And that knocked me out. Like, I mean, I remember calling Joe, a bandmate and vice chair of the org, and I was just like, can you do this? I don't know if I can do it. I don't know if I can host and do this. And I just didn't know what to do. But I took a few hours out to just kind of regroup and think like, why am I doing the thing? Why am I doing this? It's because I want to make an impact on the world. I want to make my parents, including my mom, proud. It just got me to recenter. And I realized that one of the best ways of recentering when that stuff comes up, I think acts of generosity bring us back center. Like when you focus on other people and how you can benefit them, you start thinking less about the problems you're facing yourself. And then you realize that those obstacles actually, in a way, help shape you to become the person you need to be. That the story of humankind is a story of struggle. And that struggle is what creates endurance. It creates persistence. It forges our values. And so when folks feel difficulty, when they feel like they can't go on, realize that the work that you're doing is important and how it benefits other people. And it's the easiest way to get back on track.
Nice. That's amazing advice. And I appreciate you kind of just being open about your personal stuff and sharing those stories. Super inspiring, I think. In addition to your activism work and your public speaking on racial justice, I consider you an educator. I don't know if you do, but you're a mentor to several musicians, including myself. And you've written, 2 books on navigating like a DIY music business. And you do a daily podcast for DIY musicians, which blows my mind. I'm curious as far as like what drives you to continue to like give your knowledge away like that. It's hard work.
Yeah, it's but why not? I don't know. I just think about like when I was coming up, when I was starting my music career, I was just like, I wish I had this knowledge. And so why not be the person for other people that I wish I had? It doesn't benefit me to hoard knowledge to myself.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So why not help other people out and to give it away as much as possible? I figure it'll come around some way. And in many ways it did. Like, I published, I think, about 4,000 articles on the music industry now. About like how to do something, how to like get merch, how to do whatever, like just tons of articles I've written for Music Think Tank, for Billboard, for ASCAP. I've done all those podcasts and everything. And the reward is like not only just helping artists and who, because I get to hear these stories of how they apply that knowledge and how it's helped their career, but it's also opened up other opportunities, like being able to share on the TED stage or be a South by Southwest mentor or whatever. Like people, it's funny because they're always like, how did you get those opportunities? I'm like, I don't know. I just kept giving away information. And then somebody decided they wanted to pay me to like speak about it. So like it worked out. But when I was starting up, like I needed that. I wished for that. So I knew I wasn't alone in that feeling. So why not provide that for others now?
That's so cool. I appreciate that. Now, today, as a accomplished professional, who are your mentors currently?
Oh, I love the writing of Seth Godin. He's an author, probably one of the most prolific authors on marketing. He tells authentic storytelling in a way that I think is really meaningful. He talks about changing the culture. I really love the thinking of Simon Sinek, kind of a self-professed radical optimist. Was probably most popularized because of his TED Talk that people call Start With Why, but it's really about leadership. But he actually has this great new work that he calls The Infinite Game. And I love it because it reminds people to look at this much bigger picture. Like our battles, our successes, they should be defined by that larger picture, not the immediate struggle. So those 2 guys have been really influential in kind of my thinking about things. But the list it just goes on. I mean, I love reading. I love like devouring information. I kind of am of this belief that that we should be more like trees. The thing about trees is that they never stop growing. Like if you think about it, they just go on and on and on. The day that a tree stops growing is the day it dies. And when it comes to our leadership, when it comes to artists, or it comes to entrepreneurs, we need to have that same mindset. We need to always be growing and learning and being challenged by things, or we'll get stagnant and die.
I think Coffee with BAO is one of those outlets for me to continue growing. And like this is awesome to me. This feeds my brain and my heart and all that.
Yeah, surrounding yourself with people that you just love speaking with about art. I mean, yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah. Personally or professionally, like, is there anything that you're focused on improving right now, like leveling up on?
Oh, guitar.
Really?
So, yeah, I pick I am a self-professed mediocre bass player. I've been playing bass for almost 30 years now. but I've never really like spent a lot of time playing guitar. Like I was even a guitarist for a band, and I just started collecting them and playing them again. And if I'm trying to go back to square one, because I was like, I never took lessons. So how can I develop my technique? And how can I apply that knowledge to songwriting and on other instruments? It's kind of funny. It's when I think about art that I'm not that familiar with, like instruments I don't normally like choose, or mediums that aren't natural to me, it forces me to be more creative. I started thinking about my own work as an artist and activist. And I think about my wife, who's a visual artist. She's a painter, and how much I actually learn about who I am by seeing her process as a painter. Because I am a terrible visual artist. I could never do oil painting, but I see how she does it. Like she kind of maps out the colors and the shapes, and then has a general idea, and then she works out these tiny little details, right? And she used like the world's tiniest brush. I mean, it looks like a toothpick, and she'll paint like a massive like piece of wood just using this tiny little thing. And it reminds me that like the canvas of our lives, the art we create, is not just these broad, huge strokes, like the big moments of our life. They're actually comprised of really, really tiny moments. Tiny, persistent, and focused efforts. Earlier you asked about legacy, and I'm like, well, I don't want to be defined by like just the slants or just the Supreme Court case. Those are the big moments. I want to be defined by those tiny decisions I make day to day, and like whether I chose to advance somebody else's life through an act of generosity. That's how I get to those big moments. Like it's making those tiny choices again and again and again.
Absolutely. Totally. So that really ties in with how I wanted to close this conversation, which is something I really admire about you is your persistence, your discipline, your consistency in just executing your goals. And I wonder if you have a most important like hot tip for me in terms of anything practical that I can do to stay consistent and productive.
One of my favorite pieces of advice that I've heard was from a friend of mine. She's a sci-fi author and also a teacher, Walida Imarasha. She actually has this incredible book about the justice system. But when she talks about her sci-fi work, she kind of speaks of it like this. She's like, a lot of people ask us sci-fi authors how we get to these worlds, how we create these impossible worlds. And she says that process is the same process one should be using in terms of fighting for justice in our world, which is you begin with the world that you would like to see, and then you work out the steps on how to get there. Instead of beginning with what's possible, like I can do this, I can't do that. Don't worry about any of that. Focus on that end goal, what you want to accomplish, then work out the steps to get there. You make that map to get there. And I think when it comes to these big artistic projects, apply that same kind of wisdom, and you find that it's a lot easier as a result.
Wow. Simon, thank you so much. What a valuable and amazing conversation. My guest today has been Simon Tam. He's just got a memoir that he put out last year called Slanted, How an Asian American Troublemaker Took on the Supreme Court. You can find Simon at his website, simontam.org. That's SIMONTAM.org. And find his book at slantedbook.com. Is there anything else you want to leave the audience with while we roll out?
You should definitely subscribe to Coffee with BAO because it's awesome. I love the way what you're doing. I mean, I've really been enjoying the conversations. So thank you for providing this platform.
That's awesome, Simon. Thank you so much. Simon, hang on for a sec. I'm going to give a little outro, and then I'll go back and say a proper goodbye to you. Guys, thank you so much for hanging out with us for Coffee with BAO. If you like this show, please subscribe and leave me some feedback, please, on what's working, what's not, what other guests I should have on, etc. Also, if you can financially support me in making all of this content, you can buy me a coffee at coffeewithbao.com. And thank you so much for having Coffee with BAO and Simon. We'll see you guys later.